crazy thing is, and you've talked about this, it's Bernie Sanders who's running away with this nomination fight right now in the early stages, and nobody on the debate stage seemed to notice that the other night.
No, they didn't. They all went after Michael Bloomberg, and they beat him up. They beat him up pretty good. But meanwhile, Bernie Sanders got away basically unscathed. I mean, Bloomberg did hit him for having 3 houses, and there were, they got him. They criticized him on a couple of issues on Medicare for All, but he was not the focus of the attacks coming from Warren and Buttigieg and Biden and Klobuchar, and I'm wondering why. Not because I'm not picking a horse in this fight. I'm just saying that it seems to me you'd want to try to take down the guy who's threatening to run away with this nomination. Everybody can read the polls, and the polls show or predict that Bernie Sanders could emerge from Super Tuesday with a substantial delegate lead, and the kind of delegate lead that it will be very, very difficult for anybody to claw back in the successive primaries, including Michael Bloomberg with all of his billions. It just look at the math. We know how it works, and in the Democratic race where everything is proportional, if you get a big lead, it's really hard for anybody else to catch you. So I just wonder why More Fire wasn't trained against the guy who's threatening to just run away and hide.
Yeah, Willie, Nicole Wallace yesterday on her show was talking about how she was having these terrible flashbacks in 2016. This was just like the Republican nomination fight in 2016. You had Donald Trump, who was obviously the person everybody needed to worry about. But you had Marco and Jeb going after each other. You had Chris Christie attacking Marco. You had Ted Cruz going after Jeb. Remember, there was a period of time when Ted Cruz refused to attack Donald Trump. And it wasn't until they were 2 of the last people in the field that they finally started to do that. But you look at the spate of polls that came out yesterday, and it's still not too late. California, there's a California poll that showed Biden and Bloomberg and Sanders bunched up near the top. You had a Texas poll that came out that showed about the same thing. Obviously, Sanders more comfortably ahead there, but Biden's still getting some points. And in Texas, the same thing. It was a closer matchup, and South Carolina is still pretty tight. So there's still a window for all these candidates to challenge Bernie Sanders, but Elizabeth Warren especially doesn't seem to want to take him on. It's just all the fire is aimed at moderates, and the moderates are shooting at each other as well.
Yeah, it does feel a little like 2016. Nicole's right, where you have people trying to vanquish each other, thinking they'll be the one to get to that one-on-one matchup with Donald Trump, or in this case, with Bernie Sanders. And by the time you vanquish everybody who's not Bernie Sanders is the nominee. So we should look very closely at the African-American vote, Gene. I wanted to ask you about that, too. There's a new NBC Wall Street Journal poll out this morning that shows effectively that Bernie Sanders nationally has caught Joe Biden among black voters. Remember, that spread was 30 points at some point last year. And when you look inside that South Carolina poll, Joe and Mika just read that number, he's creeping up there, too. Those voters in South Carolina are watching what's happening, as many people knew would take place. They weren't going to be static voters for Joe Biden. They watched New Hampshire, they watched Iowa, they're watching Nevada, and they say, I don't want to back a losing horse. And so you've seen Bernie Sanders now climb steadily among those all-important African-American voters as well. Yeah, and this was sort of predictable, and this is what we've seen from African-American voters in South Carolina and elsewhere historically. I mean, I think they're being very sort of pragmatic and tactical, strategic about this election. They want the Democratic Party to nominate somebody who can beat Donald Trump. And with Joe Biden's poor finishes in the first couple of primaries and some of his poor debate performances, he was much better the other night, but he's had some pretty awful ones. And people
just started taking another look around. And then you've got Bernie Sanders. Meanwhile, there is a generational divide among African American voters, and you have a lot of young African Americans, just like a lot of young people in general, who are Bernie Sanders supporters. They are, you know, when we look way ahead to the fall, one of the problems is they're not necessarily the most reliable voters. I mean, they don't come out in such large numbers, and Bernie Sanders' claim to radically enlarge the electorate by bringing all these young and first-time voters out as the way he's going to beat Donald Trump. We haven't seen that in the numbers yet, and so that's got to be worrying for the Democratic Party. His whole theory of the case, so far, he doesn't have a lot of evidence to show that it'll work.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.